I did a video where I sounded the alarm on a recent Supreme Court case decision that has made it infinitely harder for law enforcement to investigate and prosecute child predators. After I published my video, I saw a lot of comments from concerned Canadians about privacy rights, about the police state, and about warrantless searches. That's not what we're talking about here. This is about a Supreme Court case that has taken away an essential tool that's been used by police for many years to investigate and catch child predators. And now the Supreme Court decision, which wasn't even dealing with a case related to child pornography, has really made it so much more difficult for law enforcement to do this very important work. We are losing the battle against online child sex abuse. Since 2014, the number of cases in Canada have tripled. So I think we need to delve into this case a little bit more deeply because the stakes are really high. What is an IP address? An IP address is a 9-digit number that's assigned to a computer when it accesses the internet. It's much like a license plate on a vehicle. Police who are investigating child pornography can see that there's an IP address, this 9-digit number that's involved, but they don't know who that IP address is related to. It's the next step where police have always been required to get a warrant to figure out who is possibly involved with that IP address. The FBI sent an IP address to the Canadian authorities. The Canadian Integrated Child Exploitation Units across our country take that IP address, they go on an open source website, which anyone can do, they type in that IP address and they tell you that there's a telecom company that services that. They then get a warrant to go to those companies and say, tell us who is associated with those accounts. When they get that warrant and they find out who's involved, then they have to follow up with more warrants so that they can actually investigate that person's house and possibly find any of the materials that they claim are in the possession of that suspect. Now, what the Supreme Court has done, they've now said that when the FBI gives that IP address to the Canadian authorities, that it's really inadmissible because they didn't have a warrant to receive that IP address in the first place. Now, some of you might be asking, well, why isn't the RCMP just doing these investigations themselves? Why do they need to get all of this intelligence from the FBI? Well, the RCMP can't just go down to the United States and investigate these cases, because then it raises the question about how they even knew to make this investigation in the first place. It's essentially asking the RCMP to look for a needle in a haystack, except the haystack is made of all needles. It's impossible. And even if they did find that needle in the haystack, it would be inadmissible in court because of the manner in which they received that information in the first place. It's shutting down investigations into child exploitation all across our country.
The head of Alberta's Internet Child Exploitation Unit says this ruling will make its investigations much harder. He says getting IP addresses is often the first step in finding online predators. We're seeing an immediate impact already where telecoms providers have already denied us information about the IP address.
Now, I'm just as concerned about privacy as the next person in Canada. We don't want the government investigating our private conversations with friends and families. We don't want the government trying to find out what our political leanings are, or what our personal opinions are, or our religions. But what the Supreme Court is really envisioning here is a situation or a problem that really doesn't exist in Canada. Not only is it not a problem, the RCMP don't even have the capacity, nor should they have the capacity, to surveil every IP address in Canada. Now, would you care to guess how many RCMP officers are dedicated to this very important task? Is it 1,000? Is it 100? Well, in the province of Alberta, it's less than 10. One of those people are tasked with writing these warrants. Now, in the case of a 7-page warrant, it might take 4 hours to write it. But in the case of a 70 to 100-page warrant, which is often what's required in these complex cases, it could take weeks to write these warrants. And so it's not that police don't want to write warrants. It's absolutely essential to what they do. If they don't have the IP addresses in the first place, they can't even do the investigation. It's not a question of manpower. It's basically shutting down child exploitation cases as judges interpret the Supreme Court as saying that any information that's received about IP addresses, say from the FBI, is now inadmissible. It's like if the FBI saw somebody committing a hit and run with a yellow sedan, and that yellow sedan went up into Canada, and the FBI said, hey, Canadian government, there's a yellow sedan that was associated with a hit and run in the United States. Can you please check it out? Well, the Supreme Court's essentially saying that that information is now inadmissible. Police will still need a warrant in order to connect whoever's involved with these IP addresses related to child predators. They're still going to need a warrant to search their property and find the evidence that they need to prosecute the case. But what the Supreme Court case has done is basically shut down these investigations before they could even begin.
We're attacking this at global scale. This is the problem on the online side, is that, you could have a child in Winnipeg being victimized online and the offender is sitting over somewhere in the Netherlands. The servers where this stuff ends up being stored could be in the United States.
We can't accept this in this country. It's getting to the point where there's so much red tape that we're becoming a safe haven, not only for child predators, but for killers, auto thieves, and all sorts of other crimes. We have to make Canada a safe place for Canadians again. So where do we go from here? The courts have made their decision. Now it's time for politicians in Parliament to make their decision. Are we going to stand up for the rights of children and stand up to ensure that Canada is not a top destination for child predators? That means bringing in emergency legislation so that we can clarify that an IP address, which is less public than the license plate on your vehicle, should not be protected under privacy laws. This is an essential tool so that our police can get the ball rolling on these investigations. When they get a tip from our international allies, from the FBI, that an IP address is associated with child predator activity, they need to be able to take that information to get a warrant so they can find out who's involved. But the fact is that under the decision that this Supreme Court has made, if Parliament does not act, they will never be able to begin those investigations in the first place. And Canada will continue to be a top 5 destination in the world for hosting child predators. This is a big deal, and Parliament needs to act quickly to get it right. We had a lot of comments on our first video, and I encourage you to comment on this video. Let's have a discussion. Let's have a conversation about this critically important issue. As always, thank you for watching.